For those who care, my unit is the 160th Thor 3rd Battalion. We get called the Night Stalkers because of the skill of our amazing pilots, though I'm not one yet. I'm in training as of now. Currently, I'm a door gunner, assigned to covering our bird, a sweet CH-47, when we touch down or lift up in hot zones. Last weekend, my platoon, 5 men, a pilot, a crew chief, a gunner left, a gunner right, and a gunner back, were recalled to our base in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. For a briefing, pretty unusual, but we were on standby, which meant we had the slight chance of getting called to do a mission in the US, as opposed to our usual Afghanistan gig. Homeland missions can be anything, but usually we deliver SWAT teams to fortified positions in which they expect to be fired on. Trust me, it happens a lot more than I thought. I was mildly annoyed, but I didn't think much of it. I linked up with my platoon and we all went in together. When we entered the briefing room, we were surprised that we were being briefed with the actual crew we would be flying. It was cool to meet with these guys. They are usually badass Navy SEALs who always have good stories to tell, and this was no different. It turns out that the SEAL team we were flying were also on standby, and they didn't know what was happening either. After bullshitting around for a while, I eventually noticed one guy with the SEALs who wasn't cracking jokes like the others. Trust me, that is very rare for a SEAL. He was just kind of sitting there on his phone. I inquired about him as follows. What's up with that guy? Autistic? Why is he on his phone? I didn't know SEALs could shut up for that long. He turned and he glared at me, but he said nothing. Well, that's cause Clark here isn't a SEAL, one of the operators said. Well, what is he? I said. The SEAL operator responded, if I told you, I'd have to kill you, and laughed it off in an awkward kind of way. Whatever, I didn't really give a shit either way. Eventually the topic dropped and me and my crew eventually dismissed it. The best we could come up with was that he was browsing r/the red pill, since our crew chief was a woman and he kept glaring at her. Pretty funny looking back on it. Eventually our shits and giggles came to an end, and the liaison from the Pentagon began the briefing. An aura of seriousness filled the air. Long story short, an enemy aircraft, codenamed China Danger, flew through northern Mexico, Arizona, California, Oregon, Washington, and Vancouver, where it eventually crashed deep in the woods. All of this happening within an hour. What the hell? Seriously, someone research into this. I'm not even sure if it's physically possible to travel that far. As you can imagine, this was a huge deal. They take unidentified aircraft seriously, since they don't know what it's carrying. For example, a freaking nuke. The boys at the Pentagon fought tooth and nail with the Canadians, with the latter finally caving. And guess who they wanted to fly in and grab it? We were immediately flown to Fairchild Air Force Base for staging for Operation Torn Victor. At this point, I was genuinely fascinated, and I figured maybe the SEALs knew more about this than I did, so I tried to pry on the flight there. Hey, Big Chuck. He's a big boy like 6'4". What else do you know about this, bro? Ha, you think we know more than you do. You're dreaming, Boot. Trust me, we're wondering the same thing. Shit, man, this is big, I said. There was then a heavy silence for maybe 4 seconds when he spoke up. You know that smart-ass comment you made about that guy on his phone? Yeah, what about it? Well, we don't know shit about him either. He's been like that ever since we linked at Little Creek. Not very sociable. He paused for a second. He's not a SEAL, exactly. He's a 3-letter agency guy. And not the one you're thinking about. This plane or whatever it is, it's big cheese. Someone or somewhere wants eyes on what's going on once we get into the woods. They know something that they're not telling us. He paused again. I thought he was going to continue, but he never followed up. I was going to pry, but just then we got the landing signal. Salamander Squadron, 160th. We have arrived. Welcome to Fairchild. You're a go for 3 hours. Move your asses. Within 60 seconds, all 5 of us plus the SEALs were on the airstrip. They took us into the barracks, showered, fed us, and led us to our bird. A CH-47 is very customizable, so we had to get a feel of the controls and settings. Yes, we did routinely fly the 47s, but God knows what the last crew did to this elegant beauty. 2 hours in Fairchild and we were gassed and ready. We were all affixed with GoPros due to the sensitive nature of what we were covering. The SEALs got geared up and we got juiced up, coffee mainly, and we sat idle in the bird. The tension was thick. I could almost vividly hear the soundtrack from Sicario playing in the background. The helicopter in that moment was equal parts testosterone, body fluids, and excitement. I was so hyped. I was doing secret squirrel stuff, the things that I read about in books. This was it. I was living it. Before I could finish that thought, we got the go-ahead. We took off for a 120-minute flight. You don't speak in helicopters. The rotators drown out any sound. Even on radios you can barely hear, and we can't joke around on those. The result was a heavy silence as I was exploding internally from excitement. Time passed slower than slow, but we got through it. I remember looking around. Most of the SEALs had headphones in, and some were sleeping. The 3-letter agency guy was on his phone, per usual. He was swiping, probably playing Candy Crush, I thought. Overlord, we are T-15 from landing zone. All crew, get to your stations. I heard vaguely over the radio. With that call, me and my 2 other gunners got to our sides. Luckily, I was back, so I had the best view of the drop-off. Not long after, the SEALs got the call. They suited up, we landed, and the ramp fell. The outside of our bird was blackness. Zero moonlight. Even my NVGs were practically blind. I saw my buddy Big Chuck was last in line. I grew close to him in Afghanistan, and I knew I probably wouldn't see him for a lot of the years after this. Hey Chuck, be safe brother, and don't miss extract. He gave me an arm clap, and just as soon as the ramp was down, it was up and the vastness was sealed. We took off not 30 seconds after we had landed. No wonder they called the Night Stalkers the best. The flight back was more tense than the flight in. It always is. It is far, far more likely we would take a hit coming back, as opposed to coming to. But we made it through. Significantly faster, I might add. It turns out a whole platoon of SEALs is heavy. I guess ounces make kilos. But it went back quick. In no time we were back in Fairchild, where we would stay for 2 to 3 days until the team called for an extract. Until then, we were just 4 dudes and a chick on paid leave in Washington. For a few days, life was actually pretty good. A few hours after they dropped off, the hourly update stopped. Not a big deal though. Beforehand they notified us that they might lose comms before heading up into the tree line. For a while, everything was quiet. At least it was. It was 12 noon on the second day of the op when we got their first transmission since they went dark. I actually managed to get my hands on the transcript. Salamander Squadron to Taskmaster Vancouver. Taskmaster Vancouver, I need a stage to AFB Fairchild. This is urgent. At this point, the Taskmaster at Vancouver transferred him over to us. AFB Fairchild to Salamander Squadron. This is Fairchild. Go ahead. The Salamander Squadron to Taskmaster Vancouver. The transcription was very distorted. Extract zone. Very hot, we are currently in contact. Red Serpent 4 is down and out. Requesting. Breaking up. Fairchild, do you copy? AFB Fairchild to Salamander Squadron. We do not copy. You're breaking up. Repeat your last. Salamander Squadron to Taskmaster Vancouver. Red Serpent 2, repeating my last. You're coming in crystal clear. I say, we are at tree line awaiting extraction. Priority is urgent. Taking contact from unknown existent Romeo. Codename for enemy. We have not. China danger. I say again, urgent extract is needed. AFB Fairchild to Salamander Squadron, Serpent 2. I copy all. Send an immediate extraction with equipped QRF immediately. What is enemy size and composition? The radio went silent. AFB Fairchild to Salamander Squadron, Serpent 2. Do you copy my last? Silence. Serpent 2 never responded, and it was assumed that they came under heavy contact. All hell broke loose at Fairchild. An alarm sounded and a QRF was assembled. I flew with one of my gunners in a UH-60 Blackhawk instead of the usual CH-47, because it was too slow. If they said urgent, it was urgent. We had to get there now. The flight was still a decent 45 minutes. It was tense. I don't think I took my eye outside of my machine gun scope the whole time. It struck me how beautiful the snowy mountainous terrain was. I then imagined some of my best friends fighting it out tooth and nail in these very same mountains. It didn't strike me that it was impossible that we were receiving contact in the middle of a bumfuck nowhere until days after. In that moment, I was in Afghanistan. My brothers were taking contact and we needed to help them. This was just another day in the life. We boomed through the air, nearing the extract. My finger was on a hair trigger, and I was ready to take out whoever was messing with my brothers. The cold wind ripped through my now flowing hair. I was jacked. LZ coming in hot. Expect contact. T-minus 5 mics. I momentarily glanced back at the small army of UH-60s and little birds. It must have been half a dozen in all, but I didn't count. LZ coming in hot. T-minus 3. Should be visible. Guns up. The tree line came into view. Our guns were now hot, fingers on the trigger. Our UH-60 was strafing and performing a slicing the pie maneuver. The tree line came into view and the extent of Salamander Squadron's contact was revealed. Since it was now day, we could see the tree line was apparently on a 5 or 10 foot, very steep slope. Easily climbable by the squad, but a terrible fighting position. Around 5 meters out from the tree line, the terrain was riddled with multiple 2 feet deep holes, evident of grenade explosions. Multiple trees had fallen, landed below the drop-off. We continued our strafing and landed the bird sideways, parallel to the tree line. This way my machine gun was pointed directly at the slope. Instantly after landing, our QRF assault team dropped off and our 30-man team swarmed the area. Instantly dudes started shooting at the tree line. I opened up and I started scanning. The idea was the assault team would keep the enemy's heads down and give me the time to carefully pick off targets. It was a colossal mess up though. Some stray rounds hit the slope that the tree line was atop of. The result was a partial collapse of the slope, and along with it some trees. This totally obstructed my line of sight, giving the enemy time to zero in on me. After they realized that no one was shooting back, the assault team stopped firing and half of them moved up to scout it out. They saw nothing and gave the rest of the QRF the signal to disembark. Instantly 20 more dudes loaded out of the CH-47 and immediately began setting up communication and radio devices. This was now our temporary forward operating base. It would be the place we would run recovery operations until the squadron was found. In no time, communications were set up that would enable teams to head into the woods with comms intact, and they set off. Meanwhile, I disembarked from my helicopter MG post to investigate the grenade holes. Sometimes the fragments are traceable and it can lead to the type of grenade used. That in turn can lead to a supplier which can help trace who bought them. All of this assuming it was the enemy's grenades and not the missing squadrons. Soon enough, it was identified the squadrons, and not good. A few hours after, our second CH-47 arrived. It carried the battle space owners and forensics for evidence gathering. It was then that the true gravity of this situation hit me. This was big, really big. They closed off the whole scene and started photographing for evidence. The squadron's GPS was activated and was just about to be forwarded to the scout team, already deep in the woods when an anomaly was identified. The GPS of the team were not in the woods. Hell, they weren't even in Canada. Those guys were in groups all over the world. 3 were somewhere in Russia, 1 was in the freaking Indian Ocean, and 1 was destroyed. No trace of communication. Needless to say, it was concluded that they were no longer alive. More aircraft flew in and base camps were made. Small cot, not comfortable in the slightest, but having just lost some of the best guys we knew, nobody complained. We went to sleep. There was nothing else that we could do. The scout team was updated half-hourly and had nothing to report. I slept numb that first day, with dread in my heart. We awoke to the news that the scout team had found China Danger. It turns out that it was a prototype Russian SR-type aircraft. It had suffered engine failure that caused its radar cloaking effect to malfunction, making it appear as it came out from nowhere. Its extreme speed was due to the nature of its design. The American version, the SR-71, is one of the fastest aircraft ever designed. It was a case of catastrophic miscommunication that later almost became an international incident. That pilot, by the way, froze to death. Serves him right. By now, multiple other scout teams had landed and headed into the woods. Our temporary forward operating base now held 64 researchers, soldiers and recon men, engineers, analysts, and radio specialists. They had set up dozens of cots by now. The US was given access to the GPSs in Russia. It was relatively close to the Alaskan border, and the Russians were threatened with retaliation for flying in US airspace. They did it to save face. They didn't give two shits about the men that were lost. A small element of pilots were dispatched to retrieve it, along with some three-letter agency folk. They were escorted by an escort of attack UH-60s. As it turns out, I was in one of those choppers. The flight was long, one of the longest that I'd ever been on. It was over 8 hours. You know how I said that China Danger is found in the middle of nowhere? This place was 10 times more secluded. I'm pretty sure we set some kind of record for a CH-47. On my gun, I didn't feel the excitement and hype of the earlier helicopter ops. I felt dread. I knew that they were dead, but at least there was some hope. That hope that would soon be crushed. Unlike the China Danger Wood situation, the GPS here was on an open icy plateau stab. We recognized bodies as soon as they came into view of our bird. I won't describe it in too much detail, but it was bad. They were mutilated severely with their faces still being intact. It was worse that the legs and was in gradually better condition up until the head, which was practically flawless. They were nude and obviously lifeless. Their faces were inscribed with an expression of absolute horror. All except Chuck. His was anger. Those assholes, whoever they are, didn't scare him one bit. I imagined that his last thoughts were about how slow he was going to kill them. He died like a fighter. The bodies weren't dragged or, as far as we could tell, dropped. Practically no blood or smearing on the ice except the red gashes and cuts that they had. We loaded them up and not 10 minutes later, we left. That sight made me nauseous. It was the first time that I'd ever seen anything like that. I will never, until the day that I die, forget it. Off we went on yet another 8-hour ride back to the temporary forward operating base. Life sucked. I'm not afraid to admit, but I cried the whole way back. Back on the ground, the forensics were wrapping up and the scout team scoured every inch of those woods. They found nothing and the temporary forward operating base was nearly abandoned. When we landed, we had a few hours to go grab our gear before us and the last of the forensics folks got out of there. I was on the last chopper out. On the ride back to Fairchild, I was told the Indian Ocean GPS was found floating, with no body to accompany it. The next few days were a blur. I don't know if it was the trauma of losing so many of my friends or seeing those bodies, but for a while, I was really out of it. Operation Torn Victor was buried and the men all received silver stars and purple hearts. After I put myself back together, I kept coming to the emotion of anger. Anger at those who killed my friends. Someone had their GoPro footage. It was saved external at Fairchild. Someone has the radio updates. Someone knows something. I'm finishing my deployment at Fairchild, and I know this place well. I'm going to find out what happened to the Salamander Squadron if it's the very last thing that I do. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. I'll update when I can. Hopefully with some evidence.